Hello, you're listening or watching part 2 of Restructuring My Business Out Loud. And it's really cool. I have been ruminating on the fact that I didn't create more of these episodes sooner. I really had this intention of, or this vision of having this little series be created kind of in a matter of days or weeks, right? Creating several episodes in a short amount of time. And of course, life didn't pan out. There was sickness, there were other things that kind of pulled me in different directions. And I'm sitting here laughing now because it's literally been a month. I recorded and released that first episode on January 17th, and today is February 18th. And I don't think that is a coincidence. I think it's actually like a reflection of the way creation moves through me and a reflection of where I am in my menstrual cycle. And today I'm on day 26, likely bleeding any day now. And my guess is a month ago, I was probably in a similar stage of my cycle. And I'm just saying, I don't think that's a coincidence. And it's just a little bit funny to actually bring my awareness to that. And it's kind of like this, of course moment. Of course, we had to wait a whole month before we could come back to this little series. And so here we are. Today is part 2. And like I said, there's been some rumination. It's almost like the fact that I created this a YouTube series. I also have it uploaded on my podcast, but kind of calling this a YouTube series almost haunted me because I didn't want to be that girl that just has like one YouTube video up. And for the last month, I got to be that girl. So that was a bit of an ego death. I knew I wasn't ghosting the series. I knew that it would come back in its own time. And so here we are. It also makes so much sense because so many shifts and evolutions have happened in the last month, as they always do. Like, I was reflecting the other day about how it feels like there's no consistency in my life. And I kind of worked that through with my own heart, my own mind. And I was like, you know what? The consistency is the fact that I'm always evolving. That's the consistent through line. And I was able to soften into that evolution. And that has been something that I have been learning and playing with, I'd say, for the better part of like the last 2-3 years. Basically, the entire time I've had my own business, it's been this constant evolution, not just in my quote unquote identity and like how I see myself as a coach or a mentor or like whatever hat I'm wearing in the context of the teeny tiny bio I have to put on Instagram, but also in my offers and allowing those to constantly evolve and be refined. And I feel like this is a big part of what I want to bring language to in this episode is the fact that I think there's a lot of conditioning, and I totally see this as like a colonized mindset where we're supposed to kind of become an expert in one thing or a couple things, right? We're supposed to become an expert. We're supposed to be this like well-known, sought-out leader in like this one thing. And we're supposed to have this like signature offer, and it gets to be this thing that we get to rinse and repeat, and we get to scale and blah, 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 blah. And I have never, ever fit into that mold. I've never, ever fit into that business model. It's never felt good. And I've kind of shamed myself for that, thinking that, well, something's wrong with me. Something's wrong with like the way I'm showing up to my business. Why isn't anything clicking? Why is it that I create an offer, but then I never really want to do it again? Why is it that I literally want to change my Instagram bio almost weekly or monthly, depending on the season I'm in? Why is it that my website has never actually felt like a true reflection of who I am? And it's kind of all making sense. It's because I am always evolving. And so like, for example, my website copy, obviously there's parts of it that still absolutely land, and all of it is absolutely true for the time of my life that I wrote it. But the fact is I'm always evolving. So it's hard to create one piece of copy that gets to be this like source of like permanence and anchor. And I think that's why I love having my podcast, is because my podcast gets to be this like constant, I don't know, just a more current like update, right? Obviously there's the old episodes and oh my God, they're all cringeworthy. But again, I've really softened into this idea of like cringing. If I get to cringe at myself, that's like a sign and a celebration of growth. I celebrate the cringe, celebrate the cringe. But yeah, the website specifically is sometimes a point of tension because I'm not a robot, right? And it would just be completely unsustainable for me to adjust and update and refine my website copy as often as I have the urge to. And that's okay. I've kind of just made peace with that, right? It still gets to be this landing space, and obviously I update the appropriate links and stuff as I need to. But anyways, that was a bit of a tangent. Another piece in all this is, again, this colonized mindset of becoming the expert at something. I think I kind of touched on this in the last episode where I was talking about like I don't think being the expert should actually be our goal anymore. But what I want to weave in here is like there's a difference between being an expert and having expertise on something. And I think our kind of coaching culture, the coaching wellness, personal development, spiritual space, whatever kind of camp you fall in, there's this obsession with being an expert. And there's this obsession with like embodying your work. And I'm totally for that. I think embodying our work is a beautiful goal and a beautiful way to show up in integrity with your work, right? To really like walk the walk and like be taking your own medicine. I think that is really, really important. And I think the people that aren't doing that are not going to be able to continue like building successful businesses going forward, because I think collectively we are really just sniffing out that disembodiment. We're sniffing out like that dissonance of like what you say and what you do. So that embodiment piece is so, so important. I've said this before and I'll say it again, like embodiment is our best marketing. And I see many of us, myself included, sometimes fall on this like pendulum swing of hyper focusing on embodiment. And because we deem ourselves as like not fully embodied, it's almost like seeing like healing and like enlightenment as like this final outcome. I feel like embodiment is kind of like that, where we see it as this final outcome, this final destination. And so we don't allow ourselves to do things such as like create a new offer or like identify as a blah, blah, blah coach who helps blah, blah, blah do blah, blah, blah. We don't allow ourselves to go there because we deem ourselves not fully embodied. And where I'm going with this is I think embodiment actually comes, well, I know this, embodiment comes with doing, right? With action, with embodying. You can't think about embodying something. You can't talk about embodying something. You can't like listen to other people share about their experiences of embodying their thing, right? You have to go out and do the thing. And that means showing up as that like clumsy beginner. Yeah, it's like this beginner mindset. And I think a lot of us have lost touch with that. And again, I talked about this in the last episode too around innocence. We need to reclaim innocence and play in our business. And I think when we do that, we soften to this idea of embodiment. Embodiment doesn't become this like final destination or this place that we have to be before we can go do something else. It just gets to be a part of the process. And embodiment, like, I think one of the final layers of embodiment happens by teaching, right? I'm trying to think of an example of this. Like, I don't know, like I guess even in my own work, like there's layers of my own work where obviously it starts internally. It starts with me doing the work. It starts with me getting my hands in the mud and like refining potentially a process or something or an experience in my own inner world and in my own like ecosystem. And then the more final layers of embodiment need to be witnessed. So all this to say, like, you can't wait for the embodiment before you go allow yourself to be seen. That's what I'm trying to say in a really like long-winded kind of way. And I see this with like confidence too, right? We say, oh, well, I don't want to do that until I feel more confident. Or you start kind of diagnosing yourself with imposter syndrome. Can we please just take that out of our vocabulary? It is making us literally perpetuate this potentially subconscious belief that like we aren't good enough, that we're broken, that we're sick, right? We're diagnosing ourselves with a syndrome. And the thing is like, that's not it. It's that we aren't feeling confident. We aren't feeling completely embodied in our own medicine. And so the antidote to that isn't to be really critical of ourselves and say, oh, well, I'm just not ready yet, or I just don't want it bad enough, or I need to go take more trainings. No, the antidote is to go allow yourself to be like seen and witnessed and recognized in the embodiment of whatever it is you're doing, right? That's how you become embodied. You go embody things out loud. You get by going to do things out loud, and by fumbling, and by making mistakes, and by being vulnerable. And most importantly, by allowing yourself to pivot, change your mind, constantly refine, and course correct. And so that's where we're actually going today, because I've been on this massive road of like course correction and refinement. And it's been really, really cool, because I think as soon as I named to the universe that I was going to start talking about this stuff out loud, the universe was like, okay, but first, like, let's like move all this around so that you actually have stuff to talk about. And so again, I just quickly read over the transcript from the last episode just to remind myself of the things I touched on. And something stood out to me because I named that I don't have a desire to do one-on-one work in my business. And if you would have talked to me a month ago, I was literally about to make that kind of like this like loose, unwritten term for myself that like, Nicole, like you don't do one-on-one work. Like just give yourself the permission to not even go there. And it was almost as if the next day the universe is like, just kidding. Like, here, we're going to sprinkle this into your awareness. Like, source, universe, whoever, like, spoke through me and was like, no, like, this is actually something that needs to be done one-on-one. And so this beautiful private mentorship container kind of flowed right through me called Heart Power. And it's all about reimagining leadership and reclaiming what I'm kind of coining like decolonized leadership, and owning and embodying your influence. Because I think that's another thing is so many of us are like, we don't actually want to be seen as influencers. We just want to like help people. And it's so funny because aren't those kind of the same thing at the root? The problem is we just have such a bad taste in our mouth potentially from all of the like commercialized, consumerized influencers out there. But that's not what you or I do, right? We're not like selling stuff you don't need. We're not doing things just to make money. We're living and breathing our values. We are creating offers in integrity of those values and our greater vision. And the modeling, the embodiment that we do as we take our own medicine, practice our own kind of teachings, is influence. So we have to start owning and embodying that influence and not trying to steer away from it. We also have, I don't even know, for as long as I've been alive, and obviously many generations before that, all we've seen is this really toxic form of power, right? When we think of like our government and legislators and leaders in the world, it's pretty toxic. And so again, I think we have this like aversion to even being seen as a leader or having power. We've also collectively been taught to fear our own power, because if we reclaim our power, that is completely threatening the systems at play that are trying to disempower us. And so, again, a big part of, I would argue, decolonizing leadership is reclaiming that power. So it starts with reclaiming your personal power, but it's also, like I said, being able to embody that influence and not fearing your power, allowing yourself to be seen in it. And I've named this in other spaces where I was really biting my tongue for a while in not wanting to, quote unquote, trigger my clients and like trigger people in my community. And I've since learned, well, one, there's a big difference between like discomfort and being triggered. So that's a piece to this, right? But I think a big part of coaching and mentorship and helping people have transformation in their lives requires activating some discomfort, right? It requires activating some of those like shadowy, stinky, ouchy places so that we can work through them together in a safe, co-created environment and obviously like grow and expand those edges that have been like so small and like wounded. So all this to say, I've really had to step into this like activator role. And I feel like my entire life I've been told not to be too loud, not to like say things that might rock the boat, not to speak my truth ultimately, right? Because each time I'm reinforcing those beliefs, I'm internalizing that like I can't actually speak what's on my mind. So a part of this mentorship that I want to offer is coming back to your own truth, finding ways to safely express it. Um and then there's also this piece like around sustainability and like regeneration, right? And I think I've talked about this in other places too because the coaching space really has this obsession with scaling. There's obviously so much perpetuated around the narratives of like profit over people and like obviously just like how do we make as much money as possible? And the thing with that is it's all reinforcing a very transactional way of doing business. And I'm gonna guess that, like, if you're in this space with me, like, you're not about that, like, you know that that doesn't fit for you and that, like, just doesn't feel good, and that's just not in service to you or your people, and instead, we really need to come back to this relational way of building a business, and that doesn't just mean marketing in a relational way, but it's also in the way we create our offers, and in the way we price our offers, and in the way we tend to ourselves, and in the way we prioritize rest and in the way we prioritize like joy and pleasure and play, right? It's all of that. It's really coming away from this very extractional, suck everything out of you business growth. And I don't want to say putting yourself at the center, even though it kind of feels that way. I actually just wrote an email last weekend about like, I ultimately like apologize because I feel like I've been self-centered in my business. I feel like I've been self-centering my vision. And maybe we can unpack that right now. So I felt like I was self-centering my vision because I could see that I was teetering into this place of pricing and creating offers to fill a very big financial need in my life right now. And I think just saying that out loud, there's nothing wrong with that, right? Obviously, like the point of, not the point, but part of having a business means making money. And if I'm not making money, I can't keep showing up to this business. But I think where I was finding myself is teetering into that energy of just kind of getting lost in like filling my own need. And I was losing sight of my other need to be in relationship and to cultivate just like reciprocity, I guess is the best word here. I want to eat my cookie. I've been staring at it on my plate. It needs to be in my mouth right now. I think we've lost the art of showing up in service. We've become kind of obsessed with, well, who is my ideal client and what is it that I can offer them? What is my medicine that I can sell, right? It's a lot of like me, it's me-centered business creation. And I found myself teetering into that instead of actually looking outside of myself looking at my community, looking at the women and humans that I want to serve and asking, like, how can I be of service to them? How can I love them more? Right? Do you see how that energy is very different? And when I step into that energy of asking myself, like, how can I love you more? It's not necessarily that the offers that get created are any different than that other energy, but the frequency behind them is very different. And the just the energy in which I end up showing up to market those offers gets to be really different too. And I think this is something that you can't really teach in like a masterclass, right? This ultimately has to be done in a more intimate, potentially like longer standing container where we actually get to go into your inner world and look at the things that are kind of teetering you into either of those energies and looking at the colonized mindset, stories, beliefs that you might still be holding on to and beginning to dismantle them. But here's the other catch is like, we can't just do that intellectually. A lot of that is stored in the body. And so you might intellectually think, well, I am creating this offer and I'm pricing it at this. And like intellectually, that feels really good. But if your body isn't on board, there's going to be that dissonance and that's going to be felt. Circling back to my own business, because obviously this is a series about me restructuring my business out loud. All of this started because I was saying that in the last episode, I said that I'm not going to do one-on-one work. And so I've completely pivoted and changed my mind on that. And what I realized in that is, more accurately, it doesn't feel good for me to just have this very generic mentorship package offered on Evergreen on my website. And generic meaning like, you tell me what you want to work on. Like that doesn't actually feel good because I want it to be a match with my own energy and what's lighting me up in this season. So again, more accurately, I do want to do one-on-one work, but I want it to be kind of hyper-focused on something that I'm feeling really lit up about because that's going to translate to a way more potent container for the person that signs up. And also coming back to that energy of like, how can I serve? Oftentimes those passions, those things that are lighting me up are actually in reflection to what I'm kind of feeling in terms of like the collective pulse around me, right? They're not just like coming out of nowhere. They're often coming from what I'm seeing in the collective that I'm responding to and or what I'm moving through myself. And I don't think we give ourselves enough permission to really follow those currents because they change so quickly and so often. And this all circles back to what I was saying in the beginning about this constant state of evolution. So I think one of the best things we can start doing in our business is getting really, really comfortable with evolving. This also kind of leads me to looking at business through the lens of like the cycles of creation. And this is one of my favorite things to do with clients is actually like looking at how does creation move through you? And this is something that I practice with myself all the time. And I mean, I kind of, again, named it at the beginning of this call where like, oh, look at that. Like I'm feeling drawn to come back to this series literally a month later, probably at a very similar time in my menstrual cycle. That is not a coincidence. So I'm not necessarily saying that you should like cycle sync your business because I actually believe cycle syncing is a very masculine way of connecting to your menstrual cycle. But I do want to say like bring awareness to it. Notice what natural impulses and motivation you have in different phases of your cycle. Also notice when you have an idea, let's say for an offer or a piece of content, what is the process for you very naturally. Like if you aren't attached to some sort of accountability outside of yourself, if you're just connected to the intrinsic motivation that moves through you, how does that idea come to fruition? Like, what is the process around that? Is it all in one go? Do you actually create something, or does the seed get planted in your head, in your heart? You create it and then you put it out there? Probably not. I mean, maybe for a smaller piece of content, but like just talking about offers for a better example, are you sitting on offers for weeks and months and trying to perfect them and refine them until the cows come home or until you feel fully embodied or fully confident? Or are you allowing yourself to move forward in that like kind of clumsy, messy, vulnerable stage and refining as you go? And mm, this is also really illuminating to see where patterns of like perfectionism and procrastination show up for you. And illuminating some of the fears, right? Like, is the fear around being misunderstood? Or is the fear around being called out as performative or being called out as like a fraud? Or is the fear around getting it wrong, right? Which is really illuminating this feeling of still not feeling like you are an expert. And then it guides us to begin to dissect that a little bit, right? Like coming back to like, well, what is an expert? And is that actually your goal in your business? Anyways, I'm totally going on tangents here because that's what I do to kind of bring all this more forward and centered back to my own business and sharing this process out loud. For me, some of the things that have been moving through are very clearly around reimagining leadership. And so I see myself kind of weaving that into everything I'm doing lately. Everything kind of circles back or anchors back to like, how does this relate to leadership and like that embodied influence and that reclaiming of power that I've already been talking about? So that's one piece. Another piece is my own unraveling and unmasking around autism and neurodivergence. And more specifically, I've really been deep diving into neurodivergence in like the spiritual spaces and how, in my personal experience, I'm seeing kind of this binary. Either people are like completely averse to the labels, almost to the point of like dismissing the existence of neurodivergence, or at least dismissing the labels of like ADHD or autism. And in that camp, potentially just seeing everything as like it's just a superpower, or like everyone is autistic, everyone has ADHD. And when we fall into that camp, we're completely dismissing the challenges and the hardships that someone is experiencing. The other side of the binary is seeing those things as something that needs to be fixed, right? So almost like hyper focused on all the ways this is an outlier to neurotypical behaviors and trying to conform and be as close to neurotypical as possible. I didn't articulate that very well, but like basically two sides to this, right? So one is like either I guess it's almost three sides. Label averse, neurodivergence is a superpower, or neurodivergence is something that needs to be medicated, essentially, and pathologized. And I really want to offer this nuance around all that because I think, well, I absolutely don't think that it's something that needs to be pathologized, but I do think we're doing ourselves a disservice if we keep telling ourselves that it's a superpower, because I've been here. I think I had to tell myself that in order to work through some of the internalized ableism. I had to tell myself that this is a superpower, there's nothing wrong with me, to be able to get kind of on board with the truth that nothing is wrong with me. But this is, like I said, one extreme, because when I stay there, then I completely ignore or gaslight or dismiss or suppress the challenges and just the things that feel harder for me because of the world that we exist in. And so the nuance that needs to be added into these conversations is also beginning to accommodate ourselves, beginning to actually see our unique levels of hardship, right? And not just like I said, not gaslighting, not bypassing. And yeah, again, like I think this is really prevalent in like the spiritual space. I see my body of work really kind of moving, or at least a facet of my work moving in that direction, and potentially like niching down in some of my offers around neurodivergence, spiritual neurodivergence. And so I have a roundtable experience being gestated right now. This idea of kind of coming together in circle, in council. I am not the expert. I don't have the answers, but really just inviting a space to connect and hear each other's lived experiences and unpack some of these things out loud. Unpack, like, where am I gaslighting myself? Where am I actually experiencing internalized ableism? Where am I still holding on to a colonized mindset? Right? Ultimately, it's like decolonizing neurodivergence. How fucking cool is that? Let's decolonize neurodivergence. But also, like on the same token of all that is leaning into the strengths that also come with it, right? So one example that kind of comes top of mind for me is like, for a hot minute, I was really shaming myself for like my own pace. And again, this comes back to understanding the way creation moves through you. And so because I've done a lot of work to have a conscious understanding and kind of baseline of how creation moves through me, I know that I kind of do these sprints quite naturally, right? And then I also like go into hermit mode. And this overlaps with my human design. So I've done a lot of work too of like, is it neurodivergence or is it my human design? And I've kind of come to my own truth that like, it doesn't really matter which one it is. Both are just tools for my own self-exploration. But this example is like, I will sprint, right? I will have moments of literally being hyper fixated, hyper focused on something. I can get a lot done in a little amount of time when that like intrinsic drive and that like creative flow is there. And in the moments where I've shamed myself for that, and like that looks like, oh, well, I have to have work-life balance and I have to have boundaries around like when I can work, and really getting attached, I guess, to or rigid around kind of some values that I feel like I want in my life. For example, I really value being able to spend time with my family on the weekends and being around for family dinners and right, not missing bedtime stories with Aubrey. I don't even know why I said that. She doesn't like bedtime stories. She's autistic. She could care less about a story. I'm not saying all autistic kids don't like stories, but that is one of her quirks. She does not sit still for a story. And if I am feeling that creative urge to move something through me, it's actually way more potent and of service to everyone if I actually allow myself to be flexible with those values, right? Because that creative urge isn't going to be there tomorrow, in my experience, because I'm aware of how creation moves through me. So missing bedtime tonight so I can keep working on this is actually going to make me be like a better mom tomorrow. Otherwise, I'm just going to sit there thinking about the thing that I want to be creating, ultimately resenting the whole experience, and then trying to come back to that thing that I was creating the next day and completely losing the connection to it. And then it never actually coming to fruition because it deflated. There's actually, I don't have the quote, but Elizabeth Gilbert in her book, I think it's called Big Magic, she kind of relates this creative urge that I'm kind of referring to as like this affair, right? And so when you have this sexy affair, you drop everything that you're doing to like go be with that person when the time allows, right? Or when like right? Like you stop your life to go be with that person for like a weekend or for a night or whatever. I've never had an affair, but I imagine that's what it's like. And that's kind of what I've given myself the permission to do with these bits of creation that want to move through me. Anyways, I'm envisioning this roundtable experience for fellow neurodivergents, especially those that are unmasking and unraveling a late or undiagnosed diagnosis, because I think we're a special type of character where we've basically spent our entire lives trying to pretend like this very big part of us didn't exist. That's been my story, at least, right? So the past several months specifically have been coming back into relationship to this part of me that has always been there, and now learning how to kind of reweave it into my life, into the relationship I have with myself, into how I show up as a mother, and of course, into like how I'm showing up to my business. And so that's what I want this roundtable experience to be about, is like that weaving of how do all these different facets come together, and how do we learn to lean into the superpowers, right? Lean into the strengths, and also stop gaslighting the hard and begin to accommodate ourselves and actually meet and see the needs so that we can actually be supported and live happier lives. Okay. I didn't want these episodes to be long. I'm going to stop here. Obviously there's more coming. I don't even know if I talked about restructuring my business out loud other than telling you that I'm doing one-on-one work again. Oh, no. I was saying these things that are really lighting me up because that's what's kind of steering me in the direction of where my business is going. So that one aspect of reimagining leadership, which is touching every facet of everything that I'm creating right now. The second thing around neurodivergence that I just went on a tangent about. And then the third piece around decolonization. And again, like this is something that is touching every facet of my life, because it's not just about decolonizing business. It's about decolonizing our mind. And the way I see decolonization is almost like this next level from deconditioning. I know I've been on this like deconditioning journey. I think it kind of comes with the spiritual awakening, and it comes with, in my experience, my own motherhood journey of kind of coming home to myself, and just like the rebirth that motherhood offers you and matrescence. But all of those things, again, in my experience and with the women that I've worked with, are often like deconditioning from patriarchal expectations, right? And it's very much this like, I'm a woman, so I've been oppressed, right? And we see ourselves as the oppressed ones. We are reclaiming our power and blah, 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 blah. So here for it, love it. And also, I think the next step in that, and I think a lot of women are having a hard time going here because perfectionism is so real. And again, the colonized mindset is to not say the wrong thing, right? That flavor of perfectionism is like, well, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to be misunderstood. I don't want to offend someone. I just want to create safe spaces. And I love that. Those are beautiful intentions. But if you stay in that game, you are preventing yourself from actually decolonizing and rewilding a new form of relationships, a new form of leadership, a new form of business, a new form of motherhood and creation and all of that, right? Like that decolonization is now looking at not just like how we are smashing the patriarchy. It's actually like, oh shit, like where do we fit into things like white supremacy? Where now we aren't just the oppressed, we are the oppressor. So sitting with that, and again, it's not something to intellectualize, it's something to sit within our bodies through like a somatic lens. And again, this is stuff that I am embodying, right? This isn't embodied. This isn't something that I am a complete expert in. This is stuff that I'm literally working through right now, and probably will never be an expert in it, and totally at peace with that. I've started reading a book called My Grandmother's Hands. And immediately I was like, this needs to be turned into a guided book study, because it is really giving language and offering this this framework almost to decolonization through the body. In the book, the author talks about white supremacy, but he calls it like white body supremacy, because that's what it is, right? We can't intellectualize our way through this. When you think about things like racism and ableism and sexism, like those are things that our body holds. And so that's another kind of pillar of my work, is that decolonization aspect. And I think, again, it's touching every facet. It's definitely going to be a part of like the neurodivergent pillar as well, and the reimagining leadership pillar. But also this book club really feels like a beautiful anchor. So I just named 3 different things that I'm kind of creating, and they're all going to spit out at different times. They're all feeling totally alive, and I'm just trusting the flow.